anthropology, just to remind us, is study of man. Comes from the Greek term anthropos, which means man or person. And so we are looking at this issue of anthropology. Anywhere you go, some of you that are maybe involved in education or higher ed, everybody has an anthropology class. It's usually some sort of what back in the day we used to call social studies. We remember that? I don't know, do we still call it that? Tammy, what's the new term? So kind of?
Social studies up to third grade, then it is social sciences or history.
Social sciences, humanities, something like that. Yeah, kind of traffics under different names, but basically it's anthropology. And even I think you can make an argument that studying something like economics at some level is studying anthropology. It's studying human behavior, how we operate individually and corporately. Things like law is, in some sense, a study of anthropology. What is good, what's good for society, what's good for an individual, and all of those sorts of things. So I've made the case, and I made this case again last week, but I'll repeat it here just really briefly this morning. I think anthropology is the issue of our day. It's the one that we're having to talk about. So big scope of church history. If you think about the early church, they were really wrestling with the person of Christ. Who is Jesus? Is he God? Is he man? Is he both? How do we reconcile that? How do we put that together? And so you have these church councils, which we've talked about a little bit in here, that are really trying to give us vocabulary for how is it that Jesus is the God-man. And related to that is issues like the Trinity. How is it that God is one and God is three? And so early church history was really wrestling with that. And it's not like that went away, but the days to define that are kind of past, and we have vocabulary and sort of a consensus now on what those things mean. Pushing all the way forward into the Middle Ages, we have really the question of the church. The question of the church and how one gets righteous. How do you get the righteousness of Christ? How do you get that credited to you? Is it, in the Catholic tradition, that the church has the keys to the storehouses of grace and the church gets to unlock that? And in the sacramental system, you get the grace that's been unlocked by the church. Or would we lean into this idea of the priesthood of the believer, which is, of course, what we believe and teach here, that the church is not dispensing grace, the church is preaching the gospel. And as Luther said, the gospel is the treasure of the church. And so that's what we proclaim and believe. But this was a major issue. And so you had all these councils, again, that were called together, and you had Reformation principles coming out of that. And you had a counter-Reformation by the Catholic Church, and that was sort of solidified in the Council of Trent and then the Vatican Councils and others. But dealing mainly with this question. And so then we push into the 1900s, and you have the rise of the German theologians, and there was a kind of running joke in the seminary nerd world that all heresy originates in Germany. All right, so you have these German theologians that were introducing these ideas of higher criticism and form criticism, and is God's word real? Did God really say? Did God really speak? And do we actually have it? And so you get pretty raging debates like in the 1900s about just the nature of revelation and has God really revealed himself? And so you come out of that with some solidified, mostly agreed upon opinions and at least positions coming out of that. And this is most recent for us, and you get things like the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy that really made a definitive statement. And I know we don't necessarily view the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy, that was coming out of the late 70s, 80s, you don't necessarily view that as the same as the Nicene Creed. And I understand that, and I'm not necessarily putting those on the same plane either. But I do think in 200 years from now, if the Lord tarries and hasn't returned, I do think that's a moment in time when we're going to put our finger on that and say, that was important in the life of the church. This was a moment. And so it was another one of those moments, and it had to do with this doctrine of revelation. Has God revealed himself, and what is God's word? And we're thankful for that. So pressing into today, what's our issue? What are we making a statement on? What is going to define our generation of church? And my argument is anthropology. It's what is man, and this is what we're wrestling with. So there's a lot of things, emerging tech that's forcing us to really think through this. AI, the advent of AI is forcing us to think through this. Is it okay? I'll throw out a few questions. I'm not addressing AI directly today, but it's like always in our consciousness now. So I don't mind every now and then jumping into that. But is it appropriate to refer to an AI as he or she? Like, is that appropriate? Should we? Are we anthropomorphizing? Are we giving human characteristics as something that's not human? A lot of people that are using AI a lot now, they name their chatbot, whatever it is, and some of you may have done that. You give it a name, and you kind of have this conversational back and forth thing. We're outsourcing things like counseling. We're having chatbot companions now that are offering counsel and giving like spiritual advice and all sorts of life advice. So now, are we okay with that? Is that all right? What about writing things for us? Is that okay? Are we passing things off as our work? And so we're having to wrestle through that. So that's on the AI front. There's a number of other fronts that we're wrestling with this as well. Just with Neuralink and other technologies like it, which is basically a cyborg. It's a cyborg, creation, which is an interface that goes into your brain and allows you to control, devices via Bluetooth, which is kind of wild to us, right? But it's real, and so we're actually able to map consciousness and like control things external to us. And is that okay? Are we all right with that? And there's all sorts of questions that start to come up around that. Let's bring it into the church. Is it okay? What would you guys think if we had a Pastor Allen chatbot? Are we cool with that? Would you guys be happy with that? I'm a him. yeah, I do. More than identity, it's ontological reality. I'm a him. So, appreciate for you that keep up with those things. Are we okay with that? What if you just fed? I mean, I've taught a bunch of things here now. Like, there's a pretty big data set. What if you fed it into the model, and you could just kind of have an Allen in the box? It's like, what does Pastor Allen think about this? Like, are we okay with that? And so we're stressing the seams on humanity. What does it mean to be a human? And what are we okay outsourcing? And what does it mean to be embodied? What is this? What are we? And so this is our question. This is the question we're wrestling with. And I think we need what we call a thick anthropology, a thick understanding from the scripture of humanity and humanity's uniqueness. And I think that starts really with our thinking on the image of God. That's the distinction between us and the rest of God's animals. Some people are bothered by calling us animals, I think in the sense of cells and a four-chambered heart and so forth. Like, we are animals, but we're not just animals. We're different. We're humans, and we're uniquely created. So we are created and not constructed. That's where the title of this comes from. So we've looked at a few different aspects of that already. Won't review all of those today. Don't have time for that. What I wanted to get into today is after the fall. All right, so humans made in the image of God. We've talked about image bearing, a little bit of what that means. That's one of those things that's sort of always underneath, the surface as you have these conversations is we are uniquely created in God's image. So today I want to talk about the nature of sin, and we'll kind of do this in a sort of a moving picture. So we're going to talk about the nature of sin. What is sin? How should we understand the what we could call the fallout from the fall, the effects of sin? And then I want to end it, so our last 15, 20 minutes or so is going to be extremely practical, and I want to talk about how do we fight sin. I think we need to understand its nature and what it is, and then we'll get into how to fight sin. All right, fair? Let's roll. Okay, so what is sin? 3 different concepts that kind of emerge as you start reading the Bible, and there's probably more that you could add to this, but this is basically what we're talking about when we talk about sin. Sin, first of all, is transgression. It's a transgression, and what we mean by that is it's a violation of God's revealed law and standard. So Romans 3:23, this is one that many of us learned growing up. What does it say? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All right? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So it's a transgression, and you could also embed underneath that, it's a failure to fulfill the purpose. All right, so think about that. Let's think back to the garden. What were Adam and Eve supposed to do? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Yep. And they were supposed to be God's, the term we use sometimes, vice regents, representatives, to represent God. So, 10 Commandments. Second one, what's it say? Don't create any images before me. Why? Because God already created an image of himself. It's called a human. All right? So humans are image bearers. So we are representatives in the ancient world. You didn't have TVs and, Fox News and CNN. Don't pull us off that track today. You didn't have those things. So, or billboards. So you would create a bust of the ruler, just a kind of a statue thing, stick it in the middle of a town, and they knew who was in charge. So as you came to town to trade or whatever, or you were on one of the roads in the ancient world, you saw the image, and you were reminded who's in charge. So take that, plug yourself into the ancient world. The image bearer is a reminder that God's in charge. We image him, and that's our job. We are supposed to image God. And so that's what humans were created to do. So that's Genesis. They, of course, push back on God's design. They question his goodness. They don't uphold what they're supposed to uphold. And in that sense, they fall short of the glory of God. So sin, we could define it this way, is an absence of something or a failure of something. All right, does that make sense, what I'm saying? All right, so humans are supposed to be this, but they're not. That's why it says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are not upholding what they were designed to do, what they were supposed to be. Okay, so it's a violation, rebellion. Sin is also viewed as active defiance and turning away from God's authority. So it's, and again, we see this in the garden of pushing back. God said 7 times in Genesis 1, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. He gets the creation of humans. It says it's what? Very good, good. Tov, tov. It's literally repeated. It's the Hebrew word tov. It's good, very good. That's how we translate it. And then the serpent comes and says, hey, God's holding out on you. If you eat of this, then you'll know what is good. It's like, no, God already said what's good. You aren't supposed to be in those waters. That's why ethics is hard, because we weren't supposed to be doing this. It's like handing a kindergartner your geometry book. Well, doesn't go well. Actually, it wouldn't go much better if you handed me that geometry book either, but, So it's waters we weren't supposed to be in, because God already defined this, and humans have failed. So they have rebelled against the good, and they are now trying to do their own thing. All right, it's also corruption. And we'll talk a lot about this, so I won't say too much about it now. The pervasive corruption of human nature itself, not merely isolated acts. And so here's a question. Everybody had their coffee this morning. Are you a sinner because you sin, or did you sin because you're a sinner? Right. Are you a sinner because you sin? Did the act make you a sinner, or does nature precede the act? All right, and I think it's more the latter. You sin because of your nature, and that gets to this corruption piece that we'll talk about. So let's talk about the origin of sin. The origin of sin and original sin are not the same thing, just to be clear. When people say original sin, they're talking about the human condition, not necessarily the origin of sin. So original, in that sense, doesn't mean origin. It means, it refers to the nature. So where did sin come from? That's not rhetorical. I'll actually ask you. Where did sin come from? Where's the first sin? Satan, yeah. So what's our understanding of what happened there? I agree with all that. What'd you say? Yeah, yeah. So it's mysterious. This sort of pre-creation, or was it pre-creation? Was it during creation? Was it before creation? Was it after creation? A lot of people think it was after the creation of humans, and Satan was jealous even of what God had made as an image bearer, and said, I wish I could be that. And so perhaps we don't know. We don't know a lot about that, but we do know that this concept of sin, rebellion, failure to glorify God, first originates with one that we call Satan, the tempter. So Satan's rebellion, first sin predating human history, probably predating human history, at least. Could have been concurrent, but we just don't know. There's a lot we don't know here. There's only two passages that really give us much insight into what happened, and they're both very mysterious, and they're both very debated. The first one in Ezekiel 28, I won't look this one up for the sake of time, but there's a pronouncement by Ezekiel, and it's addressed to the king of Tyre, and then he goes on to talk about the fall of Satan. It's like, all right, so what's happening here? Is he, and I think what he's doing there is he's saying, this figure is like a Satan figure. And then he's giving us information about what happened to Satan, and said, the king of Tyre is like a Satan figure. I think that's what he's doing. Isaiah is the other one. Isaiah 14 says, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights and the clouds, and I will make myself like the Most High. And so this is addressing Satan, and this is the nature of his rebellion. He tried to ascend and was not happy with his place. And so we see a parallel here, right? We have Satan, we have God, who's supreme and in charge, and we have Satan, who wasn't happy with his position. What happens to humanity? We have God, who's in charge, and we have people who weren't satisfied with their position. And so the sin of Satan is fundamentally the same as the fall of humans. It's rebelling against their design, not wanting, in the human's case, not wanting to image God, but wanting to usurp God and his authority, make judgments about right and wrong when they weren't supposed to. Just like Satan wanted a position that wasn't his to have. Okay, so this is the origin of sin. A few other things, and then I'll pause for questions, comments. So Satan's rebellion, the fall. So when we refer to the fall, humanity's deliberate transgression through Adam and Eve. That's an interesting point there. Establishing sin's entry into the human race, and this is, you see this clearly in Romans 5. That's the passage that I'll quote Romans 5 in just a moment, 5:12. And then we see that it's a universal problem. So in Romans, Paul says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And it extends really beyond individual acts, and we see that it's inherited and perpetuated in society and in humanity. I think this is, a lot of times when we start a conversation about, if I just like poke a random Christian and say, tell me about humans, what's the first thing we want to say? We talk about sin, right? Humans are terrible. We're sinners. We're wretches. Fine. But that's not where the Bible starts. The Bible actually starts with image bearing, with a beautiful, wonderful thing, a good thing that God has made and designed us to do. That's why the fall is so catastrophic and tragic, because we're falling short of the glory of God. We were designed to uphold the glory of God, and we're not. That's why sin is such a problem. So, yeah, let's start in the right place when we talk about humanity. It's not with sin. But we quickly see that sin is pervasive, and it works its way into all sorts of things in humanity. Okay, any thoughts or questions so far? Next thing I want to talk about is what exactly got corrupted and messed up with sin. So we're leaving the origin of sin, and we're going to talk about the nature of sin itself, what it is and how it corrupts us. Questions? Yep, thoughts? Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we do just fine without Satan now. James 1. Um, why do you do what you do? You're pulled away and enticed by your own desires. But that is on this side of the imputation of sin into humanity. Um, so yeah. Uh, Prior to the fall, was it like that? That's a good question. God? I don't know if I'd say that. I think God knows all things possible. Um, I think he would have. In fact, like one of the things that gets said sometimes is part of the reason for the existence of evil and sin is you wouldn't know good without a bad, right? You wouldn't, when you want to. Any jewelers amongst us? Yeah, when you measure a diamond, when you grade a diamond, you have the four C's. What is it? Clarity, carat, cut, color, and then I added cost. That's the fifth C. That is an amalgamation of those, like adding up of all those. So when you do this, you take a deep black backdrop and you put the diamond against it, and then you do your grading, thing on that. So a lot of people have said like sin is like the dark backdrop, and then grace pops, against the background and you can understand good because of that. Which I think from a human perspective is true, but from God's perspective, he declared good before sin existed, which is interesting. So I think God would have known these things, and you can't really predicate like before or after time if you're God, because he exists outside of time. I picture it like this. I'm sure this isn't a perfect illustration, but if you've ever tried your hand at video editing, it's not my thing. I'm not good at it. But we live linear, right? Like you don't know what's about to happen. You don't know what I'm about to say. I have an idea, but we'll see. So we're living linear. We're moment by moment. We're alive. We're living and knowing. It's like the whole reel is in front of God, like a video, and the whole thing is eternally present to him. So all of history, as we would understand it. So, yeah, some interesting things there as it relates to sin. All right, let's move on into the nature of what happened. So the fallout of the fall, if you will. So there's two concepts here, and I'm glad to poke on these as much as you want, or I can introduce them. We can move along. Inherited corruption, depravity in this term, concupiscence. Remember that, Nathan? Yeah, all right. And inherited guilt or culpability. So inherited corruption, depravity, first of all. This is, and the term concupiscence, I know that's not a common term, so I'll define it. It refers to a disordered desire, all right? And this becomes particularly relevant in some of the conversations that we're having about, let's say, the LGBT community. How many of us have heard now, God made me this way? I have these desires. Why would God make me in a way that and I can't act on these desires that I have? And my response to that is, we have a lot of disordered desires. That's called the doctrine of concupiscence. My guess is you had disordered desires this week that weren't good for you. Anybody have one of those? Whether it's a desire for something you shouldn't eat, whether it's a desire, to do harm to somebody, or in a more, extreme sort of way, you had a desire for another person's spouse. That's not a good desire, all right? So you can't just say, God gave me this desire, and so therefore I should be able to act on it. It's like, no. You have a lot of desires that aren't good for you. So just because you desire it doesn't mean it's automatically good. This is the idea of concupiscence. You want things not good. You want things that are disordered. And so depravity and concupiscence. Inherited guilt, this is where things get really interesting to me. Are you only corrupted by Adam's sin, or are you guilty of his sin? Okay? It's an interesting question, isn't it? You didn't do it, right? You didn't eat the apple. So, like, are you guilty for what Adam did? Or are you just corrupted because of what Adam did? That's the question. I think it's a both and. So, because of this verse. Romans 5:12. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, that's Adam, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. So in Adam, we are sinners. And it's not just that we sinned. The problem is we are sinners in Adam. Our nature is corrupted and we are guilty in Adam. Simple illustration, picture it like a team. You jump off sides and the whole team has to go backwards, not just the lineman, right? And so in a headship sort of way, Adam represented humanity and he failed, which, interesting side point, it is something to note that Adam in particular is held responsible, even though it was Eve that ate first. Adam in particular is held responsible for this. And so we see this design. In Genesis 1, we see the idea of equality. Both are created equally in the image of God, Genesis 1, 26, 27. So he created them in the image of God, male and female both. So there's equality. Genesis 2, there's distinction. Adam is given a task and Eve is there to help. The first time that we're told something is not good is not Genesis 3, when sin enters. It's when Adam is alone. It's not good that man should be alone, Genesis 2:18. And so the helper's created, but there's an order here. So there's equality and distinction in Genesis 1 and 2. And so you see this like pulled all throughout the Bible. This is just one place where I think you can see that. So sin, I'm arguing, is two parts here. There's corruption that is inherited. So we are sinners. If anybody has kids, you know this, right? Did anybody ever have to lean down and teach your toddler how to be selfish? Right? It's like, here's what I'm going to help you with something here. Listen to Dad. This is how you sound whiny, and which is maybe the most grating sound in the world. It's like, no, my wife, she used to, when the kids got that tone, and she would just say, I can't hear whining. I don't know what you're saying. It doesn't work. Did you do that too, Tiana? Yeah. I can't, my ears don't work for that. And we would just force them to use their words. You probably remember some of that. My kids are in the back. So this, you don't have to teach this. It is embedded in them. And so this inherited corruption, let me be clear, doesn't mean everybody is as terrible as they possibly could be. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, though. And so even the relative good that people do is relative. It's still falling short of the glory of God. So that's all coming from Romans 5:12 and following. I've only got that one on the screen. So there's different understandings of what's happening with this, and I'll buzz through this fairly quickly. And I really want to distance a Protestant versus Catholic understanding of this. There's sort of a move, it's been around a long time, to sort of flatten out Catholicism and Protestant theology to say, can't we all just get along? We're all saying the same thing. We're not, actually. We're not saying the same thing about how one gets righteous before Christ, okay? How one gets righteous in Christ. We're just not saying the same thing. So let's just be honest and have a conversation at that level. So if you take these concepts, I'll start with the Reformed, which is my people. Corruption, we would say, there's total depravity. All faculties are corrupted. From birth, humans cannot choose God without regeneration. That is the saving work of God. In Adam, guilt is imputed, this term that we use, to all, and there's personal guilt. And then the answer then is Christ's imputation into salvation. The Arminian perspective would say that there is partial depravity. So it's the difference between being dead and sick. Right? So in an Arminian system, you're saying that man is just really sick, and so therefore, going to the last one, you need this thing called prevenient grace. You need somebody to kind of tap the alarm clock and say, "Wake up, buddy," and then you respond. All right. The Reformed perspective is saying, no, God has to breathe life into you. Arminian perspective is saying, you're really sick and you need somebody to breathe life into you. You need some help, and Christ can do that. Those two are very different than the last position here. So, in the Catholic understanding, corruption is not depravity so much as a loss of what's called privation. It's a loss of positive. So the nature is weakened, though not utterly depraved. Humans retain capacity to cooperate with grace. That's Catholic understanding. Original sin and guilt, it's a stain. It's not forensic or an imputed legal sort of thing. It's inherited by all, separate from personal guilt, and it requires penance to walk through this. And so, the Catholic understanding, here's how it goes. You enter into the system, the sacramental system of doing the sacraments, meaning baptism, confession, penance. It ends with last rites. There's 7 of them. Yeah. Eucharist, the Holy Eucharist, Lord's table. Yep, confirmation. Yeah, thank you. Got some Catholic people amongst us. What's that? Sorry. And I know we have some people coming out of that. So you have 7 sacraments of the church, all right? And baptism is your entryway. You get on the board, if you will, and then through the sacraments, Peter has the keys to the church, the kingdom, and he is, as you do the sacraments, he's unlocking grace. All right, the church that Peter originally as the first pope, and now that's handed down through papal succession, into current day. And so the church controls the storehouses of grace and is now unlocking that to you as you walk in the sacraments. All right, do you see the difference in what we're talking about here? So when we talk about, we're all just saying the same thing, we're worshiping the same God. Like, we are not saying the same thing about salvation. We're not saying the same thing about how one gets righteous before Christ. And that is fundamental. It's important. And so that's important to me, that we distinguish that. Okay. All right, I said a lot. Any thoughts on that before we move along? Steve, you came out of that. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Right. Yeah, you don't really question it. Yeah. A couple of you guys came up through that as well. Yeah. Yep. It is. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. It is, and I think there's something in us that appreciates that, because we don't want a handout, right? I need to pull my weight. I need to do this. And when you really lean into grace, it takes that out of your hands, and that's the beauty of the gospel. Is it is free. Okay, that's a lot to chew on. Yep, Steve. Yeah. Right. That's right. That's right. And he was responsible to pass that commission down. Yeah, he's held responsible throughout. That's right. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and even when Eve is given to Adam, it says a man shall leave his father and mother and be one with his wife. So there's this like consistent headship concept in Genesis that moves forward throughout the Bible. Okay. Ty did some great teaching on that a couple of years ago. Our guests, year and a half ago, when we going through our distinctive on male and female, and when we walked through all of that, I thought it was super, super well done and helpful. Okay, so let's talk about, let's get into some practical stuff. I promise the last 15, 20 minutes or so would be a little bit more on the practical side. So deep breaths, you made it through the theology part. I know some of you are grooving out on this, and some of you are like, I don't know what you're talking about. So welcome back. Let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts things. I do think this stuff is important, and I feel like theology is immensely practical because it helps you understand who we are and how life operates. So standing on the foundation of that, then let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about the practical consequences of sin and what happens to us with sin, and then let's talk about some methods and understanding of how we battle against sin in this thing that we call sanctification. So sin's dominion. Sin introduced this concept that is sometimes called spiritual death or separation from God. Romans 3:23, we quoted that, all sin falls short of the glory of God. Romans 6:23 talks about the consequences of that sin. Because people have sinned, because humanity has sinned, we are now separated from God. The gift of God is eternal life, but the consequences or the wages of sin is death. So we understand that. So, over the years, people have talked about the Romans road of salvation, where you take just there's a few key texts in Romans, and you could easily lead somebody to see all of sin falls short of the glory of God. What's the consequence of sin? The wages of sin is death, and then you progress on from there. So it is spiritual death, and also we would say physical death was a consequence of the fall as well in the original. Bondage to sin's power. We do see that those who are living in sin are in bondage to sin. This is Romans 6 and verse 6. It says, we know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. So he's talking about one who has been converted. You're no longer enslaved to sin, but you're now free in Christ, which, of course, the implication is you were enslaved to sin. You were before Christ. So you were underneath it. You were a slave. There's a corruption of all faculties, and this tucked under this is a concept called the noetic effects of sin. And what that means, it sounds like the name Noah. It's not. It means noos, our mind, and so there's an effect in our reasoning, in our capacity to understand, and sin is pervaded all of those things. So I have the theory, working theory, not the first person to say this. I think Adam, short of Christ, was the smartest person to ever live because he wasn't impacted at all by sin. And so there's a spinning down like after Adam until Christ, the one who wasn't impacted by sin, born without the original corruption that we talked about a moment ago. So sin's dominion. Since consequences, we are guilty before God. We've already talked about that. We see that shame and hiding is introduced in the Genesis story. Physical death and decay, I mentioned that a moment ago. Relational fracturing, first with God, and then we also see between the man and the woman. And then immediately after the fall in Genesis 4, we see the first murder. And so we see relational decay begin to happen in Genesis really all the way through. And then ultimately judgment, which we mentioned that a moment ago as well. Here's where it gets tricky sometimes is sin can be very deceitful. It can trick you. It can fool you. It can cause you to think something looks good that's not actually good. It's interesting over in 1 Timothy 2, where Paul is using the story of Adam and Eve, and he doesn't say that the man was deceived. He says the woman was deceived. The man wasn't deceived. The man disobeyed. The woman was deceived, which is interesting. So sin does deceive. It does deceive, and it tricks us. Satan loves to trick us and try to tell us something's good that's not actually good. That was the original temptation. So it enslaves us, and it hardens the heart progressively. So a small sin today becomes a bigger sin tomorrow. It's progressive in that way. And that's why we need to work hard to fight sin and talk about this concept of sanctification, or becoming more like our Savior, more like Christ. And underneath this, we talk about something called progressive sanctification, meaning that there's a progress that's taking place. I'll jump straight to this. I've got some other views and understandings, but I think I'll just skip that and go right to what we understand and teach. And that is that we are progressively moving towards Christ-likeness throughout the course of our lives. But if I was drawing this graph, I borrowed this graph from an article I was looking at. If I was drawing this graph, I would draw it a little bit more like a stock ticker. All right, it's a little bit more up and down. That kind of gives the impression that it's generally trending, clearly in the right direction. I think it's more like Bitcoin. It's like fear, like that. And so, the 90-day window versus the 30 versus the 1-day window can create very different stories sometimes in our own sanctification. But this is the understanding: is that as we live, Jesus is making us more like himself, as we live and walk in the Spirit, and that is the consistent biblical answer that we see. We are being conformed to the image of Christ. Some of the other concepts is there's this moment in time where there's this special work of grace that happens, and then all of a sudden you're kind of elevated to this higher plane, and you don't sin anymore. Don't think that's at all what the Bible teaches. I think it teaches this slow progression that takes place throughout the course of our lives. So let's talk about how do we do this? How does sanctification works? So two parts of this that I think are clear enough. One, we have to fight sin, and then two, we have to pursue holiness. Kevin DeYoung's book, The Hole in Our Holiness, the basic premise of the book is this. He says, what is the hole in our holiness? And he says the hole is we don't actually want to be holy. That's the real problem. And that's a very convicting thought. Do we actually want it? Do we actually want to fight sin? Do we actually want to say no to our flesh? That's a question that we have to really wrestle through. And then are we, pursuing holiness? So here's a few. We'll camp here. And I want to get your thoughts, and let's walk through this. Enemies of sanctification. That last one, ignoring the spirits, should just say spirit. There's not more than one. So sorry for that. So enemies of sanctification. Compartmentalizing your life. So some of you know that I served under a pastor who ended up falling into moral corruption, and that was much later exposed. And people asked me after that happened, did you see that coming? I don't know how many times I got asked this, because I knew the man pretty closely. And I said, not that sin, not that particular sin. I said, but there were other things that I saw that concerned me. And here's how I picture it. I think I've used this with you guys before, but it connects here. Some of us have bamboo that runs around our neighborhood and yards and stuff here in Florida. Everything grows. And you'll have a shoot of bamboo that pops up, and you'll say, that came out of the middle of nowhere. Did it? Did it? No. It actually came from the neighbor's yard 3 doors down, and it just kind of shot underground, and then it popped up. And so when this sin, in this case, it was sexual sin, when it popped up over here, and people are like, that came out of nowhere. I'm like, oh, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. And so when we compartmentalize our lives and we say, you know what, I'm going to hold on to anger and bitterness and frustration and irritation, this is my pet. I'm going to have this over here. Don't be shocked when something else pops up 50 yards away. Don't be shocked. When you feed sin, when you compartmentalize your life, when you think that you can seal off your life one area to another, be careful. You can't. Sin loves compartments because they can't contain it. Okay, thoughts on that before we move along? All right. We've probably all got examples of this. And I think we need to think through this. Very related, I picked up this thought from Jerry Bridges many years ago. Categorizing sin. I want to make a statement, and you just tell me what's wrong with it. I know that's wrong, but it's just a little sin. What's wrong with that statement? There's a lot wrong with that statement, actually. Yes. Sin is sin, right? Sin is like a sheet of glass. The law of God is like a sheet of glass. You can break it with a pebble. You can break it with a bowling ball. Broken's broken, right? So violating God's law at one point is as if we violated it all. I'm not saying that every sin carries the same consequence. We all know that isn't true. So that's not the issue. Some sins might disqualify somebody from ministry. Some sins don't. So there's different consequences. But in terms of your sanctification, walking in holiness before the Lord, sin is sin is sin. And that's the problem. And so the way I've liked to say it is there's no such thing as a small sin because there's no such thing as a small God to sin against, right? Every sin is an affront to God's holy character and nature. So it doesn't work. But I think we play this game. This was small. It was just a little thing. And we don't take it seriously. I think that's what we do. Next, isolating yourself from community. Nathan, you guys led us, and Roy and others, Josh, taught through a long series on the church this past spring. We just talked about the danger of cutting yourself off, being a lone ranger, not sharing your life with other people, not having the input of others. It's a dangerous thing when we start doing that. It's an enemy of sanctification. We should think of sanctification as a group project. Do you remember the group projects in school? You know, where one student does all the work and then everybody gets a grade. It's not quite like that. But you're working together, you're collaborating. Sanctification is collaborative to where we should be comfortable in environments where, like, hey, I see this evidence of grace in your life. Or, hey, I see an opportunity for growth here for you. And we want to be kind, and you need the relationship and the foundation, and you need that in place. But when we don't have that, I think we're missing out on a tool that the Lord has for us in sanctification. So we need to be working to cultivate those relationships. And so it might be in a feedback, direct feedback sort of way. It might just be being around other people that remind you, of who you are and what Christ has done. When you're away, when you're cut off, when you're not worshiping with God's people, when you're not in the Word, it will have an effect. Sooner or later, it has an effect. Next, defending your sin. I think we do this as well. We try to justify ourselves sometimes. We do it in very subtle ways too. And I know David's talked about this a little bit, and I've talked about it as well. Sometimes when you apologize, you end up apologizing for the other person, right? Have you ever noticed that? Like, I shouldn't have said what I said, and then what do? But you, it's like, are you apologizing for me or you? Because sounds like you're kind of indicting me as you try to justify yourself. And so apologize full stop. Hey, I need you to forgive me for this. And stop talking, right? Just stop. That is when this forgiveness, loop can and transaction, the reality of that can take place. So, but otherwise we kind of pass it off. You did this to me. No, No, it's in your heart. They found it. And some people are good at finding it, let's just be honest, right? Like they're really good. They're like, electromagnets, like, come out, sin, temptation. And it can find it in our hearts, but they still didn't create it. They didn't put it there. They just found it. And so we need to keep those categories clear. And then the last one is, what I was trying to say there is ignoring the Spirit. And I think this ties into all of these really. When when the Spirit within you is bringing that conviction of sin and is putting his finger on you and saying, you need to deal with this, and you just shut it off, it gets easier to do that the next time. And you begin to have a dull conscience towards those things. And so we need to be very careful of that, be sensitive to that. Jonathan Edwards has a great sermon, and I every couple of years I just read back through it again. But it's called Searching the Conscience, and he talks about a lot of different things in there, but he talks a little bit about this concept, and he talks about ignoring the Spirit and ignoring the work of the Spirit and the danger of that. Another thing he talks about is community, and he says we should listen when a brother or sister comes to us and puts their finger on something and says, hey, you need to think about this, or I see this in you, then it concerns me, or whatever. You need to think about that. He says you need to listen to your Christian brothers or sisters. He said, but you really need to listen to your enemies, because they're actually going to hit you where you're weak. He's like, your Christian brothers or sisters, they're going to pull their punches a little bit because they love you and they want to be kind to you and they don't want to hurt you. He's like, when your enemy goes after you, he's like, they're going to probably hit something that's real. And he goes on to talk about the usefulness of enemies and non-believers in our sanctification. And so when we start to view it that way, that whatever these situations are, it is sanctification sandpaper that's just rounding off the edges. These things are useful for me, and we start to change our mindset on that. I'll leave you this image here. We love the concept of manufacturing. Picture a 1930s steel factory kind of thing. It's loud, there's steam, there's production, there's a conveyor belt. You can look at the end of the day and go, I made a widget, I made a gear, I made a thing. Sanctification of the work of the Lord is slow. It's more like apple trees or orange trees. It's this slow, consistent energy that the fruit of the Spirit is producing. Imperceptible sometimes day to day. You have moments in time where it's, you have the spike, but it's imperceptible a lot of the time. That's the slow work of the Spirit, and that's the sanctifying work of the Spirit. So don't get impatient. Don't get impatient with God and His work in us. Don't make peace with sin, but don't be impatient either. All right, we got 90 seconds. Any final thoughts? Yeah, Steve? Yeah. Anybody hear anything about COVID this week in the news that they want to talk about? I'm kidding, don't. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And the fallout of that has been phenomenal. And, one of our kind of knee jerks when the COVID thing happened, everybody was like, online service. And I said, our elders, we got together and said, I don't think we want to do that. It's not really a service. So what we did is offered some devotionals that we posted and recognizing the need for something, but saying we're not together really. And so, it took us a while to think through that. And, but I think that instinct, I would stand by that instinct to say it's not the same. Yep. Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the let go, let God kind of philosophy. Yeah, and it sometimes you'll hear somebody say, well, God hasn't convicted me of that. I'm like, it's in the Bible, yes, He has. Irrelevant. Irrelevant. Right there first. And so Yeah, when there's clear things like that, we have to. Yeah. Yep. Last word.
I was actually thinking along the similar lines, we're talking about the hole in our home. And we don't actually want to be holy.
Yeah.
Being the issue, kind of tied to that. Or to not want that sin. We don't want to actually keep the sin. We just want to not have to struggle. Like we have the stories.
That's good.
Sometimes God worked around this. The alcoholic come to Christ, and like they just don't want to do that anymore. Just don't. And so we just want that for all of us. God just doesn't have that for us. More of that. I think that's a lot of times we don't want to do fighting. We just want the spirit.
Yeah. Christ was tempted. Process that. But we don't want to be tempted. We think we're going to not be tempted, maybe. It's not true. Okay. Time's gone. Lord, thank you so much for our time together. Thank you for the work of your Spirit. Help us be patient.